Well, it happened again. That's right, I'm mentioned in the Epstein files. Again. You probably saw my first video on this topic, and if so, you probably came away from that thinking that I've spent the past decade being, just as awesome in my private life as I am in my public life. Like, you probably thought, wow, there's no way anything could come to light now to change my opinion of Rebecca. So I have to once again offer my sincere apology because, in the latest dump of millions of new files from Jeffrey Epstein's correspondences, more emails about me have come to light. And I'm sorry to say that your opinion of me is probably going to change because I'm actually even more awesome than you thought. Okay, look, it's not often that a Cassandra like myself gets to see a bunch of people come around to agreeing that, she was right all along. So forgive me for this one video where I get just a little full of myself. If you missed the previous video for some reason, my name was in the first Epstein document drop because back in 2011, I criticized physicist Lawrence Krauss for defending his friend, Jeffrey Epstein, years after Epstein was revealed to be a pedophile running a sex trafficking ring. Unbeknownst to me at the time, Krauss immediately forwarded my critical emails to Jeffrey Epstein, and they whined about what a mean bitch I was. And then in 2016, Krauss emailed quite a bit with Epstein to get his advice on how to deal with BuzzFeed reporters who were investigating Krauss's long history of women reporting that he sexually harassed or even assaulted them, because of course he did that. Epstein was able to evade justice for years after it was well known that he was running an international pedophile ring, so surely he must know how to help Krauss wriggle out of some relatively tame attempted rape accusations, right? I'll be honest, I didn't really expect that there would be more interesting stuff in Epstein's emails that would relate to me, so I didn't even bother searching the new documents. I was wrong. Because helpful followers pinged me on social media to let me know that not only was I mentioned again, but this time it wasn't even directly from Lawrence Krauss. This time it was Richard Dawkins. Now, before I get into it, I'm going to give you a reason to stick around through the rest of this video. Over on Blue Sky, I got a little giddy and I announced that if I got a certain amount of likes, I would share some petty and embarrassing stuff about Richard Dawkins in this video. I got those likes within 5 minutes, so I'm going to do that. But first, I also said that if I got a ridiculous number of likes, I would also share some bonus fun stuff about Michael Shermer, who you may know as the editor of Skepchick Magazine and recently ardent defender of fascism. Well, it did get enough likes, so I'll start with a quick little fact about Michael Shermer. He was well known for two things at conferences. One, trying to have sex with as many women as possible who would leave his room with a signed copy of his latest book and a Skepchick magazine pin. And two, for delivering the most boring PowerPoint presentations in the history of conferences. So a couple of my friends came up with an idea to make them more enjoyable. They developed the game Schmingo. Whenever Shermer was scheduled to speak, friends would hand out Schmingo cards with squares like mentions libertarianism and slide with way too much tiny text on it. And we'd text each other our wins, but there was a special prize for anyone who had the guts to actually yell it out loud. And after he was accused of sexual assault, we joked about making the free middle square sex pest. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk about Dawkins. Before I share the hot tea, I want to give you a brief overview of my history with him. For several years, we were polite to one another at events. I thought he was a nice guy. But in 2011, a few months after my post about Lawrence Krauss defending Jeffrey Epstein, I happened to be on a panel at a conference in Ireland with Richard Dawkins called Communicating Atheism, in which I talked about some of the crazy misogynistic hatred I get by being a female atheist in the public eye, including a lot of misogynistic stuff from atheists. And a few days later, on July 2nd, Dawkins posted a comment on PZ Meyer's blog mocking me for complaining about the treatment I get, comparing me to a fictional Muslima who isn't allowed to drive and gets beaten by her husband. Wow, misogynistic and racist, who would have thought? Within hours of him posting that comment, I was being flooded with insults and death threats and rape threats from Dawkins fans, the likes of which I could not have even imagined at the time. My website got DDoSed. Google canceled my AdSense because people reported it as fraudulent. My entire family got doxxed and started getting threatening messages. Basically, my life was never the same. Even today, literally today, the day I am filming this video, I got a new really scary threat. It sucks. So on July 5th of 2011, after I got the site working, I posted about it in a blog post titled The Privilege Delusion. Now, remember that title because we're going to be talking about privilege again soon. In that post, I mentioned that I thought it was an odd thing for him to have posted at all about this topic, but especially because he had just sat next to me on that panel and heard about all of the really awful things people send me and how it negatively affects me and also negatively affects other women in this movement and how it was turning women away from the movement. Unbeknownst to me, the day prior to my post, July 4th, 2011, Richard Dawkins reached out to John Brockman with a question. Brockman was a powerful New York literary agent who ran Edge.org, which was bankrolled by Jeffrey Epstein. Brockman served as an important connection between Jeffrey Epstein and all of the various scientists and New York intellectuals that Epstein wanted to meet. And so his name shows up a lot in the files. Here's what Brockman looks like in a photo taken of him along with Steven Pinker, Daniel Dennett, Katinka Mattson, and Richard Dawkins from one of the times that they all flew together on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. So on July 4th, 2011, Richard Dawkins wrote to Brockman, "There is a rather nasty young woman called Rebeccawatson who seems to be running some kind of witch hunt against Lawrence Krauss because of his defense of Jeffrey Epstein. There are people on her blog talking about organizing a walkout when Lawrence speaks at TAM in Las Vegas. I remember that you told me something of the circumstances of Jeffrey's arrest and that his case is not as black as painted. Might you possibly remind of it? Thanks and greetings from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Richard." Brockman naturally immediately forwarded that letter to Jeffrey Epstein, which is how we can all read and enjoy it now. What interesting timing this was. 3 months after Lawrence Krauss alerted Jeffrey Epstein to my evil machinations, Dawkins has decided to seek out information so that he might hopefully debunk my reporting that Epstein is a pedophile. Just a few days after he posted an incredibly racist and sexist comment and was getting dragged online for it, before I had even commented on it myself. Dawkins is mentioned in a lot of other files, but it's stuff like Epstein talking about hanging out with him and Krauss talking about getting him to the island. But obviously, we already knew Dawkins knew and hung out with Epstein because there are photos. These guys did not care about leaving evidence because, as I mentioned in that previous video, they thought that raping little girls was a normal thing that rich men are just allowed to do. And, were they wrong? But this particular email is very funny to me because it really highlights how I got under Dawkins' skin without even trying, without even knowing. For me, his comment, the Muslima comment, came out of nowhere. And then I watched as he blackballed me from every major skeptic, atheist, humanist organization around the world. His employees let me know that a person could not even say my name in his presence without him blowing a gasket. And one volunteer even related how she saw him scream at the president of American Atheists for suggesting that I be invited to the Reason rally in Washington, D.C. Today, obviously, it's more well known that Dawkins is a weird freak because in the years since then, he kind of went off the rails on Twitter, posting about dog 69ing and crying because airport security took his honey, etc. But back then, I was really confused about what was going on with him. How had I accidentally pissed this guy off to this level? It was a few months later that a friend of mine mentioned a possible reason for Dawkins' meltdown, and it made a lot of sense, but I never talked about it publicly because I mean, it was just a hypothesis, and I really thought that people, if I mentioned it, people would just think that I am a bitchy gossip. But I don't care anymore. So, and it's actually relevant, I think. So I'm going to tell you. At that panel in Dublin, I specifically talked about my experience with rape and death threats in response to women on a previous panel who all agreed that that sort of thing simply does not happen in the secular atheist world. I wanted to offer my own perspective that actually, yes, it does. And the woman who was most insistent that it doesn't was prominent secular writer Paula Kirby. And I addressed her directly by saying that I really admired her writing, and I was surprised by her ignorant take on misogyny in our movement. At the time, I did know that Kirby was involved with Dawkins Foundation, particularly the UK operations, I think. What my friend related to me months later is that Richard Dawkins was, in fact, fucking Paula Kirby. Now, when he told me that, I did immediately believe him because I had helped organize prior conferences and I had heard from several other organizers that if you invite Dawkins to speak at your conference, you also have to invite whatever woman he happens to be fucking at the time. Usually, but not always, a blonde, 20 to 40 years his junior. So I had already assumed he had some kind of arrangement with his famous wife of more than a decade, Doctor Who's Lala Ward. But it hadn't occurred to me that he might be so furious with me because I happened to disagree with a woman he was fucking. And fucking her, he surely was. Months later, someone sent me emails that were revealed in a court case. You see, in 2010, the Richard Dawkins Foundation sued Josh Timonen, who ran their website, claiming that he was fraudulently pocketing funds. As part of that case, this email appeared in the public record from Robin Elizabeth Cornwell, the blonde evolutionary psychologist, 20 to 40 years Dawkins Jr., who was at the time the executive director of the Richard Dawkins Foundation. Hi, Josh. I've managed to get a bit of sleep, and while I do need to rush off, I do want to discuss some possibilities. First, I am behind the idea of simply closing the entire forum down, archives and all, after the 30 days. Richard will also back you on this. He really did misunderstand, and his absolute goal was to protect you. One of the things I know extremely well about Richard is he is conflict avoiding and he female dependent. There is a lot of psychology at work here, but Richard is extremely weak when it comes to demanding females. While Richard and I are not together any longer, we do have a friendship. It has been under a great deal of strain. When Paula, who has been his mistress now for over 2 years, found out about me, she demanded that he end his friendship with me. It has been a struggle, and I will be very honest here, extremely painful on an emotional level. The irony is that I would never have become executive director of RDF if Richard and I were still in a sexual relationship. I have done my best not to use our relationship to move the foundation in the right direction. And in fact, when Karen was trustee, she did all she could to keep me out of the loop on all financial decisions. She succeeded. Paula will remain an influence on Richard, and for whatever reasons, but she does not have to be the one that Andrew goes to for advice. Unfortunately, Richard had constantly assured me that she was not involved in the foundation decision-making processes, but apparently this is not the case. The fact that RD excluded me from the discussions and directly misled me is a matter that I need to clear up with him. What I don't want is for you to feel in the middle, nor do I want you to have to take sides. There is no reason to take sides. I am not giving RD any ultimatums. That is not my style, and given that RD is very conflict avoidant, he is not going to be comfortable with having to go back to Paula and tell her that he is not taking her advice. So I'm in a bit of an awkward position because while I will throw myself in front of a train for you and Andrew, I also would do the same for Richard. And then she talks about what to do about their internet forum. Extremely weak when it comes to demanding women, huh? Interesting. By the way, Lala did eventually leave Dawkins, as noted in this exchange between Deepak Chopra and Jeffrey Epstein. Subject line, karma. Remembering all of this, I decided to see if Cornwell is in the latest Epstein drop, and guess what? She is. It turns out that Cornwell claims that she was in attendance when one of Lawrence Krauss's many accusers said Krauss rubbed up and down her leg at an event. Krauss reached out to Cornwell during the BuzzFeed investigation in the hope that she could testify that in fact it was the woman who was being a creep, and Krause turned her down, and she's probably just angry about it, and that's why she's claiming he touched her inappropriately. Krause then forwarded her testimony to the BuzzFeed reporters, who sadly were unable to verify her account. And then obviously Krause forwarded the entire exchange to his best friend Jeffrey Epstein, famous pedophile, who, by the way, is clearly getting fed up with Krause's shit by this point. Finding that exchange made me wonder if there was any more funny Krause stuff in the latest drop, and boy, is there. First of all, we could figure it out from that first drop of emails, but this one really makes it clear how Jeffrey Epstein could not stand Lawrence Krause. For instance, in 2010, Epstein gave Krause money to invite a bunch of intellectuals like Steven Pinker and Richard Dawkins to a conference, but a lot of the invitees said no, and so Krause started inviting fillers, and then he started CCing Epstein on plans to go scuba diving, at which point Epstein finally snapped and told him to stop fucking around. Then in 2013, Krause forwards Epstein a fan letter he got saying that Krause, Dawkins, and others inspired this kid, and Epstein replies, "Great, it's you, Dawkins, and others. Is this the best use of your brain and time?" Which clearly cuts Krause to the quick. Maybe not, but it is one use. It is also easy for me. And also it seems that exciting good young people to do science is one of the things professors can and should do. I just do it globally instead of in a classroom. Epstein then dunks on him again, calling him a performer, at which point Krause waves a little white flag and begs him to stop. Understanding how much Epstein loathed Krause is essential to truly appreciating this next email from 2017, which reveals that at some point, Krause assumed that Epstein was going to help him make a vampire movie called Vampire Noir. My favorite Krause email thread, though, is this one, where he is trying to retain a lawyer to help defend him in his university's investigation into the BuzzFeed allegations. And while he's chatting with the lawyer, at the same time in other email threads, Epstein is telling Krause to just drop it and not hire a lawyer. And finally, Krause gets all confuzzled about who to listen to, so he actually emails the lawyer he hasn't even hired yet and says, "Hi, Justin. I have a slightly unusual request. I have been advised through much of the BuzzFeed experience, both before and after, by a friend who is also somewhat infamous. His name is Jeffrey Epstein, and you may know who he is already." Bottom line is that Jeffrey is not only friends with most of the famous people from finance to business to Hollywood who have either been brought down during Me Too, and he also speaks regularly with people ranging from the awful White House people who he is friends with to Ken Starr, etc. He is concerned about exactly how we play this, as he thinks because of the variety and number of different things being discussed in the media and online, that this will be considered beyond Title IX. I should say that all indications I have thus far do not suggest this. But anyway, Jeffrey would like to speak with you as he has concerns about my having counsel who directly represent me in interactions with the university at this time versus having someone to act as an advisor and draft letters that I can send. I will pay for your time to do that if necessary. Would you be willing to do this in the next day or so? Holy shit, Lawrence Krause is so fucking stupid. He's being investigated for sexual assault, and he told a lawyer that he hasn't even hired yet that he's not sure whether he should listen to the lawyer or his friend, famous pedophile rapist Jeffrey Epstein. So he wants them to speak to each other and work it out for him. The lawyer actually agrees to talk to famous pedophile rapist Jeffrey Epstein on behalf of Lawrence Krause. And eventually the lawyer is like, "Look, this is getting extremely annoying and you're wasting a lot of my time." At which point Krause finally agrees to retain him. I assume the lawyer welcomed this relationship because imagine all of the great stories you're going to get out of somebody that stupid. Oh, and also all of the money you'll get out of somebody that stupid. Also included in the Krause-Epstein files was another name I wasn't expecting. Ron Lindsay, former executive director of Center for Inquiry, which, fun fact, merged with the Richard Dawkins Foundation some time ago, at which point RDF's executive director at the time took over. That was Robin Blumner, a brunette woman 20 to 40 years Richard Dawkins Jr., who had assumed that role from Edwina Rogers, a blonde woman 20 to 40 years Richard Dawkins Jr. But Ron Lindsay was the head of CFI in 2011 when Lawrence Krauss publicly defended Jeffrey Epstein. That was also the year that Lawrence Krauss was a featured speaker on a cruise for CFI when he propositioned a CFI guest and asked her to join him in a threesome with his partner. When this latter information came to the attention of CFI employees in 2014, thanks to the woman's friend reporting it when the woman herself was too embarrassed, they begged Lindsay to stop inviting Krauss to events, particularly events when unsuspecting women might be stuck on a boat with Lawrence Krauss. In full disclosure, one of those employees was my boyfriend at the time. He loved working for CFI. That was his dream job. And he believed in their mission of building a more secular, rational world. But he was horrified when Lindsay not only refused to do anything about Krauss, but actually invited Krauss back for another cruise and made him an honorary board member. The final straw came in 2013. Women at CFI had worked really hard to put on their second annual Women in Secularism conference, and Ron Lindsay insisted that as president of CFI, he should be able to deliver the introduction. He did so, and he used his time on stage to spotlight criticism of feminists for silencing male voices because those men have privilege. In his speech, Ron Lindsay bemoaned the situation where the concept of privilege is used to try to silence others as a justification for saying, shut up and listen. Shut up because you're a man and you cannot possibly know what it's like to experience X, Y, and Z, and anything you say is bound to be mistaken in some way. But of course, you're too blinded by your privilege even to realize that. This approach doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work for me, said the man addressing an audience of women at the Women in Secularism conference that was entirely organized by women for women. It's enforced silence, he said, dogma spread by the likes of the religious and, of course, the Marxists. This was incredible to watch live. I tweeted at the time about how ridiculous it was, and Lindsay immediately went on the attack, confirming that I am, in fact, one of the mean feminists. The next day, I wrote a blog post explaining why it was a pretty tone-deaf way to start a women's conference, which infuriated Lindsay. That evening, there was a fundraising dinner that speakers were expected to join, but Lindsay wasn't there. He was up in his hotel room composing a blog post responding to me by saying I inhabit an alternate universe and saying my recent smear may be the most intellectually dishonest piece of writing since the last communique issued by North Korea. He insists that he is on the side of reason and evidence and I am just doing identity politics. That attack, which was immediately bolstered and echoed by the men who were already harassing me, was what finally pushed my boyfriend at the time to quit his dream job at CFI. He held out because the board of directors said that they would investigate the matter, and a month later, they met and announced that they would do nothing. The hosts of the podcast he produced for them, Chris Mooney and Indre Viscontis, also left, and happily their show was quickly picked up by Mother Jones. So, how did Ron Lindsay end up in the Epstein files? I'm sure you've already guessed, but yes, it's because of Lawrence Krauss. The BuzzFeed reporters reached out to Lindsay to confirm or deny the story told to them by several employees, that the employees went to Lindsay with the details of Krauss sexually harassing a woman on the cruise and asked that Lindsay stop platforming Krauss, which he refused to do, leading to at least one employee's resignation. The reporter also asked him to confirm that another employee told him that Krauss had cornered her in his hotel room and tried to molest her. Lindsay responded by telling the BuzzFeed reporter that he had heard about the cruise incident from just one employee. He randomly mentions that Krauss was in a very loving relationship at the time. I'm not sure what that has to do with the fact that he invited another cruise attendee into a threesome with him. And he says he immediately got the victim's information and called her. The victim substantially confirmed what the employee said and said that she did not want to pursue the matter further. Then he talked to Krauss, who denied the allegation. And so what more do you need? That's the end of things. He decided that meant it was perfectly fine to invite the pedophile defender / threesome lover to cruise the Galapagos with CFI. And he's sure that was the right decision because he received no complaints about his conduct, just like the 0 complaints he received from the previous cruise. Sure. And yes, he did acknowledge that the employee did tell him about the assault in the hotel room, but she didn't seem too scared of Krauss and didn't volunteer to make an official report about it. So again, not a big deal. Then he clarifies for the BuzzFeed reporter that my boyfriend did not quit over all of this. No, it was just because Lindsay had a public spat with me, the girlfriend, which is a whole other story tangential to your Krauss piece. So I will not get into it here. But it's not tangential, is it? Because guess what happened after Lindsay wrote this reply defending Lawrence Krauss? I mean, you already know, don't you? Lindsay forwarded his defense of Krauss to Krauss, who promptly forwarded it to his best friend, famous pedophile rapist Jeffrey Epstein. It's not tangential that our public spat started with Lindsay literally using his privilege as a rich man to get on a stage at a women's conference that he did not organize and blame feminists for silencing men. It's not tangential that he then used his online stage to dehumanize me and stir up men's rights activists to punish me for daring to criticize him. It's not tangential that he did all of this in a clear attempt to protect male supremacy in his movement, to castigate mouthy broads like myself who dared to say, hey, maybe we can do better. Maybe we don't need famous rich men who treat women and girls as objects, as prizes to win and then dispose of when they're inconvenient. Maybe we can build a secular movement through progressive humanistic ideals and good people doing good things for their communities. The idea that someone would think that, let alone say it out loud, terrified Ron Lindsay, just as it terrified Lawrence Krauss and Richard Dawkins and Jeffrey Epstein and every other mediocre rich man who was trying to coast by and just enjoy their lives. They were furious because it's like, what do you mean you don't need us? We're rich, we're famous, we have parties on tropical islands where all of our wildest dreams come true. And I don't give a fuck. You guys suck. You're idiots. I hate you. Just look at how scared of me Lawrence Krauss is. In one email, he's talking about some letter he wrote to try to defend himself from the BuzzFeed article. I couldn't find it, but I did find this evidence that he spent a lot of time working out exactly how vaguely he could describe me when trying to castigate me as ringleader of the movement to impugn leading male atheists, because Rebecca and her crowd are very, very vicious, and I don't want to start too much of a fire there. Yeah, you know what? You were fucking right to be scared of me, you disgusting, pathetic sex pest. I hope you never again do a lecture where at least one person in the crowd doesn't ask you exactly what you did on Jeffrey Epstein's island. And I hope that Ron Lindsay really enjoys having a little cameo in this latest release, really cementing his legacy as a man who enthusiastically helped run interference for a man who openly and gleefully harassed and abused dozens of women over the course of decades and who kept company with the absolute worst pedophile in human history. All so that Ron could keep his boys club running without the pesky interference of women like me saying, hey, maybe you could stop talking long enough to listen to what we're saying. Hope it was worth it. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.